first landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico. The rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brazell was the man who discovered the saucer.
What I thought was a star began coming in my direction at a very rapid rate of speed.
The unidentified object, which some sources thought might be a blimp, moved slowly down the Pacific coast from Santa Monica and disappeared south of Long Beach.
I saw a UFO, and it went down the river, turned right at the United Nations, turned left, and then down the river.
UFO Classified. UFO Classified. No more plausible deniability. Fact, fiction, or the truth. You decide. And now, the new voice of the high desert, the hostess of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes.
Well, welcome to UFO Classified. I'm Erica Lukes. I was happy to be here live on Friday nights on the best digital broadcasting network on the planet. I love KCOR. Big shout out to all of my friends. And I'm seeing Northern UFOs, David, Amy, Joe, I said Northern UFOs, but Phil, Tom. And I also want to give a shout out to Northern UFOs, who helps me every single week get as much attention to my radio shows as I possibly can. He helps me get it on YouTube, and that really has increased listenership, which is great. So take a moment, and after we post tonight's link, share that information, get the word out there. This is a show that I do every week and spend a lot of time researching, because I believe it is important to get good information out to the public. And the more I learn about what's taking place, specifically in the UFO community, the more I understand the gravity of the situation and the real dire need to get that good information out. My guest this evening is one of my favorite authors and friends on the planet. His name is Nick Redfern. I know you've heard him on my show before, and he just has released a new book called Top Secret Alien Abduction Files, What the Government Doesn't Want You to Know. Nick needs really no further introduction other than the fact he's super cool, into cryptids, into ufologies, yada, yada, written like 100 books. I mean, I don't know. What else can I say about you? You're kind of a troublemaker.
There's plenty that can be said, but whether it should be said on the airwaves, I'm not quite so sure.
Oh, dear. Well, that's just part of your bad boy persona, so, Are you staying out of trouble?
No.
Oh, Lord, have mercy. Well, it's a good thing that I suppose you've got your friends there to keep track of you.
I guess, maybe.
Well, so you've done lots of different radio shows, and I just have to ask you, what's your favorite?
Well, yours, of course.
Well, hello, thank you.
Followed by, I like doing Coast to Coast. I enjoy doing Coast to Coast, and I kind of like that sort of late night sort of talk show.
Okay, well, I don't really want to hear any more about that. I'm just thinking, just stop with your first statement. That'll be good.
All right, we'll stick to that one.
So you've got a new book out, and tell us a little bit about it. You sent it to me. Thank you very much. It looks fantastic.
Oh, well, thanks. And, well, the book, as you said at the beginning, Erica, it's called Top Secret Alien Abduction Files. And the issue of sort of alien abductions is, obviously if I wasn't interested in the book, I would not have written the book, and it's an area of ufology that I have a deep interest in. But, when you're sort of a writer of books, but also a reader of books, I'm not just somebody who writes books, I also actually read books as well, believe it or not. and so, when I'm always thinking about a new book, what can I work on? Even if it's not a new subject, if there's a new angle you can put on it, I think that sort of helps, the reader. You don't want to just go over old ground and just recycle everything. So over the years, I've sort of got a number of stories from various people who were abductees and still are abductees, but who had sort of confrontations and interviews and things like that with people from government agencies, which strongly suggested that to some degree, an agency or agencies within the government had an interest in the abduction phenomenon. So the more I dug into this, the more cases I got, the more I found that was actually the case. Now, although there have been dozens and dozens of books written on alien abductions, nobody's really written a book on what the government knows about this subject. So I felt, the time was sort of right now, to sort of to do that, to put a book out that demonstrated that yes, there is a deep interest on the part of governments, even if they're not sure what's going on. And I don't think they are. I think they're quite disturbed as to what's going on, but they don't have all the answers. So I thought, well, why not put all this out and people can have a look at, this lesser known aspect of the abduction phenomenon.
So what were some of the disturbing elements of your discovery process when you were researching this book?
Well, I'd say not one of the most disturbing, I would say the most disturbing was that I was able to speak to a number of abductees who, after having been abducted by usually the greys, there's some cases where they weren't the little grey aliens with the black eyes, but the vast majority were, that after having the alien abduction experiences, they had been followed up with sort of clandestine interviews and interrogations by people from within the military and government. And when I say interrogation, I don't actually necessarily mean in sort of like a sinister, dangerous fashion. For the most part, the people I interviewed said the people who spoke with them were actually quite, sort of down to earth, and there was no sort of pressure, but they just said, would you be willing to basically tell us your story and sign like the equivalent of like an NDA, you won't talk about it, but we're trying to get a handle on what's going on. And the one question, or not one question, the one angle that surfaced in several of these cases where the government was interested was the abductees who claimed that their sort of soul had been sort of ripped out of their body. In other words, as if the greys could sort of manipulate the human soul and take it out of the human body and manipulate it. And people talked about being on UFOs and seeing, like, sort of floating above their body. The body was sort of described as being on, some sort of like a bed on the UFO, and they were looking down at their disembodied body. And that was the one angle more than any other that disturbed a lot of the abductees that I spoke to who'd had this connection with the government, was that it seems that the government, or an element within it, or the military or the intelligence community, had a deep concern about this angle of the greys having almost like an obsessive, sinister interest in the human soul. And they, from all the people I spoke to, it did not seem as if the government had a handle on it or had a full understanding of it. They just knew that there was something connecting all this, and they were sort of fearful and were couldn't get the answers themselves. So then they started to sort of approach the abductees themselves and to try and get the answers.
So who specifically, and I know we talk about these different factions involved in this, or different factions that are trying to squelch UFO research, or maybe say like we've talked about before, that it's demonic or things, but who specifically was looking into the abduction phenomenon?
Well, that's a good question, because I've never sort of seen any hard evidence that there is what you would call like, project abduction or anything like that. It seems that over the years, different agencies, for different reasons, have looked into this aspect of alien abductions and how it might impact upon national security. But different agencies and groups have looked at it from different perspectives. Now, when people, sort of are new to this, they might think, well, this is just garbage. There's no way that the government is putting together files on people who claim to have met aliens. But the fact is, a lot of the material I use in the book has come through the Freedom of Information Act. It's not sort of hearsay or people's word, etc., etc. It's actually through official documents. Now, although the book is on the abduction phenomenon, I actually start the book with the contactee movements of the 1950s. And the reason why I do that is because it gives us sort of a precedent for what came later. For example, in the early 1950s through the late 50s and early 60s, the FBI opened extensive files on some of the early contactees. And for people who don't know what the contactees were, they were basically just regular people who felt compelled and impelled to go out to desert locations and isolated places where they would meet these long-haired aliens that became known as the Space Brothers. And the Space Brothers would warn us about the perils of nuclear war and, we need to disarm our missiles and rockets, otherwise, the planet and everything on it would be destroyed. Now, the FBI opened numerous files on the early contactees. For example, George Adamski's FBI file, one of the early contactees, one of the more famous ones. His FBI file's about 150 pages. George Van Tassel's, a similar guy, is about 300 pages. Frank Strange's, who's another one, and George Hunt Williamson, Truman Bethurum, Orfeo Angelucci, all these early contactees who claimed face-to-face contact with aliens had files opened on them by the FBI, and I've got all these files through the Freedom of Information Act. So this is important because it acts as a precedent for what was to come up afterwards, namely that way back in the early 50s, government agencies were taking an interest in people who claimed face-to-face alien contact. So I include those several chapters, opening chapters in the book, because it demonstrates and proves that people who claim to have met aliens for whatever reason have been watched and have been the subject of extensive files. So it makes sense that when the contactee movement started to fizzle out and the abduction phenomenon kicked in the early 60s, it makes sense that the abductees would have been watched officially and secretly in the 60s onwards, in the same way that the contactees were in the 50s.
So let me ask you, the contactees, when you're looking at the type of alien that they had contact with, what were some of the physical descriptions?
Well, the big difference between the Greys and the abduction phenomenon of the 60s onwards, like with Betty and Barney Hill, and before that you had the contactees, the biggest difference was that the so-called Space Brothers looked very much like us. Now, there were some differences, but a lot of similarities. They were often described as being sort of 6 to 6.5 feet tall, that sort of long blonde hair, which, you just never really saw in the guys, back then in sort of the 50s and so on. And they also had this almost like blank expression on their faces. They tried to come across as friendly, but there was also this angle of them being sort of detached and emotionless. And again, the message was, stop messing around with atomic warfare, otherwise, it's going to be the worst scenario possible. So the biggest differences were some of the physical appearances, the height, the hair. But other than that, they actually didn't look that much different to us. If they sort of cut the hair and, they didn't have this sort of blank look on their faces, they could have passed for us for the most part.
But they were all blonde, blue-eyed, and so they were all, quote-unquote, the master race. They would be the Nazi ideal. And I think that is really interesting. And I know that in another interview that you had done with Martin Willis, you had mentioned that one of the reasons that these people were really being watched is because the government intelligence was concerned that these people had some very subversive ideas.
Yeah, that's right. You have that very disturbing angle that a lot of the so-called Space Brothers were sort of blonde and blue-eyed, and we, that was the early 50s. Well, we've all heard the blonde and blue-eyed angle from the Second World War, with the Nazis and so on. So you can understand why some people did make a parallel, and a lot of the Space Brothers were sort of kind of bullying types almost, this is what you have to do and so forth, and so you can understand why this certain people in ufology have sort of embraced this ultra right-wing kind of elite, blonde, blue-eyed type scenario, which nobody really should be embracing at all. It's like a very disturbing and dark issue, which goes far beyond just ufology. But yeah, you're right that one of the main reasons why the Space Brothers phenomenon and the contactee phenomenon, why these people were watched so closely, was because, as I said, the Space Brothers warned people that we should drop all our nuclear weapons, close it all down, etc., etc. But on top of that, the contactees themselves came to believe that the kind of governments that the so-called Space Brothers had was like a communist government. Now, George Adamski, who was one of probably the most famous contactee of all, his first book, which came out in the early 50s, Flying Saucers Have Landed, sold in 6 figures, so massive sales, and all across the world. But in saying that, Adamski said that the aliens he met out in the California desert were pretty much had a government that was kind of communist, and he said that Russia would rule the world, and that the Russians only needed to send sort of 20 bombs to the US and would be wiped out. And so you can understand quite well as to why the FBI would take an interest, because here's this guy. If he'd just been talking about alien encounters, I'm sure no one in government would have cared less at all. But here was this guy, George Adamski, selling books in 6 figures and saying that communism was the way of the future, and hundreds and thousands of people going to his lectures, hanging on his every word. Then you can see how this slightly eccentric Polish guy who moved to the US went from being somebody just writing about UFOs to someone who affected national security because of what he was saying about communism and how, from his perspective, it was a good thing. So that was one of the main reasons why the FBI were concerned, not just the UFO angle, but the fact that people were talking about, the aliens being communists and everybody buying these books. So, common sense alone sort of demonstrates why people like J. Edgar Hoover said, we need to keep a careful eye on these people, because it's almost as if they're promoting communism but doing it through a UFO angle. So, it's sort of a fascinatingly weird era in which the government really was closely watching people who claim to have met aliens. And, you kind of see similar parallels as things progress through the 60s and actually right up to the present day as well.
Well, you absolutely do. And I've had, Jan Aldrich and Gordon Lohr, Barry Greenwood on my show. And a very interesting thing that Gordon Lohr, who was involved at NICAP in the 60s, and we've talked a lot about the fact that John Acuff actually wanted to sell all of the NICAP files to a person in Canada who was involved with Samstadt Publishers, and they this was a Nazi organization. They were deniers of the Holocaust. They published This Is Why We Love Hitler, The Hoax of the 20th Century, A Straight Look at the Third Reich, UFOs, Nazi Secret Weapon, Hitler at the South Pole. And so you look at this and you see where some of this, the Antarctica stuff, the UFOs, the Nazis, all of this stuff is coming from. And to me, that's deeply concerning. And you see this now with some of the key people who are YouTube stars and on the lecture circuits, and they're promoting this, which is deeply concerning.
Well, you're right. I mean, there are a lot of right-wingers in ufology who have have sort of combined their interest in UFOs and their right-wing traditions and beliefs into one. I mean, nobody with a normal brain, you know, should have any kind of admiration for the Nazis or anything remotely connected to them. You know, there's no way other than to say that the Nazis were scum. You know, you can literally wrap it up in that one word, scum. That's what they were. You know, and had we not won the Second World War, we'd either be wiped out because Hitler was on the verge of developing an atomic weapon himself. Either, you know, Europe, the UK, America would have been just decimated, or we'd have been overpowered, and today we'd all be speaking German. You know, that's the harsh reality of the situation. And so anyone who even, you know, tries to present an argument why, you know, why parts of this, if you like, you know, are good or positive. There are no good or positive aspects to any of this at all, you know. And I mean, I've had a lot of discussions with people about this, you know, and almost kind of fist fights at the Roswell Festival in Roswell last summer, in the summer of 2017, with a moron who basically, I mean, literally said, I do mean literally said that the Nazis were misunderstood. You know, that's like saying the Nazis are misunderstood. Actually, for like 20, 30 seconds, I was just like tongue-tied. You know, I mean, you know, I'm someone who talks a lot on radio. I actually was sort of like, for 10, 20 seconds, frozen, you know, just for an answer. I mean, because anyone who believes this sort of Nazi agenda, or also embraces a kind of a Nazi agenda and champions, you know, the Nazi flying saucer angle, that is going down such disturbing and dangerous pathways, because there are people, impressionable people, who are going to follow those people. Right. And, you know, when you see all in the world today about, I mean, racism is on the rise. You know, in today's world, it should be on the downside, not on the upside. And yet we're seeing it everywhere. You know, somebody has different coloured skin. They have you know, their name sounds, quote, foreign or, quote, you know, whatever. And it's, you know, it's becoming sort of very quite disturbing, really. You know, very disturbing.
And I absolutely agree. And I think the thing that's really sad is that there are good people who go to or gravitate towards the UFO community because they're trying to find acceptance and they're trying to find answers for really traumatic or curious events in their lives. And instead, they're being subjected to these cult figures who are propagating absolute BS because people who are emotional can be easily manipulated. And so you go in and you look historically at the UFO subject through the 50s, 60s, 70s. I mean, there has been a lot of disturbing elements involved, and that's unfair because this is a genuine subject and it deserves to be looked at rationally. And the people who've had experiences deserve to be supported without this kind of garbage infiltrating our community. So I am Erica Lukes here, and I have a feeling this is going to be one of my better shows tonight. I'm with Nick Redfern. We're going to take our first break. I will get to your questions. We will be right back.
Stand by. This is UFO Classified with Erica Lukes. Erica Lukes. The phone lines are open now at 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio. More UFO Classified. UFO Classified with Erica Lukes on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. After this.
Here's what happened on the last episode of Three Guys, No Ties.
Close. I don't know what's more dumbass, him losing his license or that this was on the front page of a major news outlet.
It's a huge story, and of course we're going to cover it here on Three Guys No Ties.
It's not, but it looks ridiculous, and so you want to look. You clicked on it, right? We got it. Don't we? I saw the same thing. As soon as I saw it on your computer screen, I wanted to see what that story was. So it's even newspapers are doing clickbait.
Three Guys, No Ties. Wednesday nights, 7 to 9 Pacific on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is your captain. I'd like to welcome you on Jackpot Airlines Flight 1610, service to Lost Wages.
They say what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Well, apparently, they need a reality check done Vegas style.
Vegas, 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 Vegas.
Tune in Wednesday nights, 9 p.m. Pacific, 12 a.m. Eastern, for Reality Check, hosted by Jessica Johns, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Biggest star in the world, bigger than Britney and Christina put together.
If it's happening on the Vegas Strip, you'll know about it here first.
You are a dirty little fun haver.
Join Jessica Johns as she explores and goes behind the scenes of what's hot and what's not. From the best entertainment Vegas has to offer to national celebrity gossip.
That's crazy. Absolutely crazy.
Jessica has her finger on the heartbeat of the city, and she's waiting to share it with you. Reality Check, hosted by Jessica Johns. Wednesday, 9 p.m. Pacific, 12 a.m. Eastern. She does Vegas right.
Yeah, baby.
Hamilton was adopted from a rescue in 2008. How could you not love him?
Hamilton the Pug's adoption story started at a shelter. Visit theshelterpetproject.org to find a pet near you. Brought to you by Maddie's Fund, the Humane Society of the United States, and the Ad Council.
We interrupt to bring you this.
Would you like to advertise on KCOR Digital Radio Network?
This is what I'm talking about.
At a fraction of the cost of traditional radio advertising, why not?
Tell them the good news.
Whether you need to promote your next book, product, or service, we can customize a package for just about any budget.
Finally, there is hope for the hopeless.
Why limit yourself to a tiny local market when KCOR can brand you to the world?
Here's all you do.
Visit KCORradio.com or contact our sales department by email at saleskcorradio.com.
We want it now!
See the difference with us by letting us work for you.
This ain't reality TV!
The KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Keyboard Cat, Hamilton the Pug, and Toast Meets World. These are some of the internet's most beloved pets. And they all have one thing in common. Their stories started in a shelter. Start your story. Adopt a dog or cat today. Visit theshelterpetproject.org to find a pet near you. Training that pet to play the keyboard, that's optional. Start a story. Adopt a shelter or rescue pet today. Brought to you by Maddie's Fund, the Humane Society of the United States, and the Ad Council.
It's great. I think it's great. It's great.
The all-new KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Great. Make a note of it. It's great.
You're listening to UFO Classified with Erica Lukes, where the truth isn't hidden beneath the black lines of a Sharpie.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
To be on with Erica, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio.
Radio contact.
Share your thoughts on the show on Twitter by using hashtag KCOR. Or head over to the live chats at KCORradio.com.
The audience goes nuts!
And now, your host of UFO Classified.
Are you ready?
Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
Welcome back. I am Erica Lukes, happy to be here on a Friday night and hanging out with one of my favorite researchers and friends, Nick Redfern. We had a very important discussion, the first part of our show, which we're going to continue, but I want to give you, for those of you who do not know about Nick, I want to give you a little bit of information. He is a full-time author and quite prolific, I might add, who specializes in everything. I mean, I never honestly met somebody who has so much knowledge in many different fields: Loch Ness, Bigfoot, UFO sightings, conspiracy theories, alien abductions, paranormal. Oh, I mean, it is astonishing to me. He has written almost 60 books now. Nick, how many books have you written so far officially?
It's around about 50. I'll have to sort of get to the shelves one day and make an accurate, count. But it is around about 50-ish.
But I mean, I love the way you write. I mean, you have such an eloquent way and an exciting way of keeping people engaged, and then also getting good information out. And I'm not just trying to make you feel good here, even But I mean, people do really enjoy reading your work because it's an enjoyable read.
Oh, well, thanks. I mean, but I try and I usually write in two styles. One, if I'm doing sort of like a historical book, like the Top Secret Alien Abduction Files, you tell the story of what happened, the history of it. But when I do my other big interest, which is cryptozoology, the study of unknown animals like Bigfoot and Loch Ness Monster, I write those in a very different style. I sort of write them in like a journal/diary style, where I write them in the way that I went on the expedition, it was a dark and stormy night, and I jumped in the car, that kind of thing. So, because I think, if you're going to write about your own expeditions and investigations, I think people kind of like that first-person diary approach, So those are sort of, the two writing styles I use, sort of the historical facts angle, and then, the story as it happens, when you're out in the woods, that kind of thing. So.
And so what will our little book be about?
It might be X-rated, I don't know.
Oh, my God. Okay.
Who knows what that looks like.
Oh, baby Joseph. Okay, wow, 10 ways to make me blush this. Gee, okay. Well, I'm going to be bathing in holy water right now. Okay, let me compose myself. Anyway, thank you. Okay, so on that note, I have a couple questions in chat that I want to ask because they're from people who are really thoughtful. Amy Collins wants to know, do you think that the government spy on UFO groups because of their own shortage of knowledge, kind of like a form of outsourcing intelligence?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, and it's one that I do sort of agree with, but a lot of people in ufology often don't think about it, namely that, if the government's investigating something, people assume the government knows all about it. But I actually don't think that is the case. What I do believe is that the government, when I say the government, that's sort of like a generic term for, it could be this agency or that agency or two or three other groups or whatever, or think tanks. But, I just use the term the government as like a catch-all term. But I think certainly from looking at the abduction phenomenon, I think the government has a lot of information, but when it comes to literal 100% answers, I think they're still as baffled as we are. But we don't expect the government to not have the answers. We expect them to have all the answers, regardless of whether they tell us about them or not. So I think that's an important point. They interview people, they keep a close look on social media as to who's saying what. But I think the government does not have a full understanding of what the abduction phenomenon is, but they're trying to find out by sort of clandestinely speaking to people and hoping, they'll be willing to share their stories, which might provide more insight. So, in that sense, I don't view the government as the bad guys at all. I view them as people who, just like us, like yesterday, they would be having Thanksgiving, but today they're back at work on this top secret program they cannot discuss with anyone. But I think they find themselves in this situation where they're dealing with something they don't fully understand, but which we all think they do have all the answers, but they don't, and I think that's an important thing to remember. A lot of people don't think about that. They don't think that the government doesn't have all the answers. They think the government does have all the answers, but I'd be surprised if they had 10 or 20% of the answers, really.
Right, and it's so compartmentalized. I mean, that's the difficult thing. So another question from Phil, he wants to know if you think that TTSA is or was responsible for interviews with abductees.
If who was, sorry?
Tom belongs to the Stars Academy.
Oh, I'm honestly not sure about that, but what I can say is that based on the files that have surfaced through the Freedom of Information Act on abductions, and I've got a lot of cases in the book, which they're not hearsay or friend of a friend, they are the real official documents that I was able to get through the Freedom of Information Act. What I found is that, the files demonstrate that most of the agencies and departments that were involved in this were sort of counterintelligence departments, the guys who were sort of experts in the field of espionage and disinformation, and who could really, speak to people, get their trust, request that they don't talk about this, but then also, they're sort of putting together disinformation stories like a plausible deniability kind of thing, where, somebody starts asking questions about the government looking into abductions, there's like a plausible deniability that, no, we're not. So, a lot of these people were looking into the abduction phenomenon from a very careful perspective of not ensuring that not too much information got into the public domain. But of course, at the end of the day, we're all human, and people make mistakes, and files get released, and when they perhaps shouldn't do. And but yeah, I think for the most part, it's intelligence people that seem to be involved in this particular issue. Trying to figure out, is it something that is just dangerous to the abductees, or is it something that is of national security proportions for all of us, for everyone,
Right, and I think with To the Stars Academy, I mean, you look further and you look at Luis Elizondo and the fact that he was involved with ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, which was the United States government's study to identify UFOs, and this is we know that the Pentagon allocated $22 million for this, and some of that went into purchasing the MUFON database, including witness names and addresses. And so, there you go, looking at abductees and the government's interest in that. That's pretty much right there for you.
Well, I mean, the thing is today, when it comes to surveillance of people in, not just the UFO community, but in the alien abduction angle, it's become far easier for surveillance to occur. I mean, you go back 30, 40 years ago, it quite literally was like, following someone home with a slow pace in your vehicle or whatever, or, the early fairly primitive phone taps and intercepting mail, when people actually used to sort of, write letters and put them in an envelope and send them off, and they would be intercepted. But today, I mean, none of that counts anymore now, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Twitter, whether it's email, it doesn't matter what it is. A skilled organization within any agency will be able to access that. And but sometimes that's not even needed, because you have so many people in ufology who are posting on their own timelines on Facebook. They're telling, their latest information they found, their latest discoveries, their latest theories. So in many respects, they don't even have to hack into anybody's system. All they have to do is just watch on their Facebook page to see what they're doing, what they're talking about. So in many respects, the whole angle of surveillance, we do their job for them by just talking about it on Facebook. Hey, I've just been given this new story by, the granddaughter of a guy who had an experience in 1951 and he read the Roswell files. Well, somebody puts all that on Facebook. You don't need to, sort of survey that person. You just read their post,
Right.
And a lot of people don't realize that, things like Facebook are the perfect angle, if you like, for people putting their stories out there. And anybody wants to listen and read it, can do that.
Well, and I mean, I think that's a really important point to stress. I mean, people turn to Facebook, and I see, and I'm guilty of this. It's like you want to know what this is, and so you're going to post on Facebook, and there are people that I see that are posting, this is what happened to me, and da-da-da-da-da, and it's like, I just, as important as it is to share information, we have to be really cognizant of the fact that, yes, everything that we do is being watched and monitored, and do we know, who the person monitoring our communications is? Are they doing this for the greater good of humanity? I mean, there's so many questions, so we just need to be diligent about what we do.
Yeah, you're right, and I think, a lot of people don't necessarily appreciate that, you post something online that may have something to do with national security, even though you might not think it does, but it might well. And so anybody on the inside who is sort of monitoring this or that will clearly gain access to that information. And like I said, the days of having to, creep around somebody's house at midnight and, break open their mailbox or, install a tap on the, wiretap and things like that. I mean, those days are long gone. And it always amazes me that some people think that long gone period, that they view it as still going on. But it's so, none of that has to be done at all today. It's just so easy, to avoid doing it that way. And again, I think, there's this, for me, I guess the most disturbing aspect is that if you look in today's world, I mean, a lot of people just don't seem to care that they're being watched even. It's like, oh, well, it's that worst scenario possible. Well, if I haven't done anything wrong, it doesn't matter if they watch. That's complete crap, I mean, everybody, if you haven't done anything wrong, nobody should be watching you. It really is that simple, If you're somebody who wants to destroy us, and drop a dirty bomb wherever, well, of course they should be watched and they should be, brought in, etc., and interviewed and, and if it's proven that what they were planning is real, well, lock them away for the rest of their life. But, it's kind of like, it doesn't end there. It's, you look all around the world, you find people who are on a list just because they demonstrate about how animals are treated, in farms and whatever. I know a lot about that. I know a great deal. I have friends who, have, demonstrated about, the sort of circumstances that go on behind the scenes in slaughterhouses and farms, which is like, it's a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. And yet the people who are trying to promote that are actively being watched because they're perceived as being going against the grain, so to speak. Well, they're not. They're just people who love animals, and that's the crazy side of it all.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I definitely think that we're living in a very strange time because we're being desensitized to this. And then, like you say, I mean, we just assume that everything we do is being monitored and put out there. And that's really, I mean, I guess that's the way it's rolling now because we've allowed so many, all of the Facebook and Instagram and Siri and all of these, different things into our lives. And the lazier we get, the more control somebody has.
I don't have any, issues at all with some guy who legitimately, and we know legitimately for sure that this person is a danger to us. I don't have any problem with that person being watched and followed and emails monitored, everything, because, if they're trying to destroy us, well, let's destroy them first, But the idea that everybody, potentially could just be watched just because of this or that. You look at smart technology today. It's just getting to the point. People say to me occasionally, what do you think about we're all going to be implanted with little devices under our skin? Well, I always say, well, there's no point. Nobody's going to implant you under your skin because you've got an iPhone or a smartphone, which follows everywhere you go. Anyone can track where that iPhone is taking you, that smartphone is taking you. If you're someone who goes on your iPhone, and you buy, you download five songs from Amazon, you purchase a new pair of sneakers or whatever, you buy this book. Not only does that allow someone to access that material and see what you've bought, it also demonstrates to that person what you're into. What books does this person, she or he, read? So in other words, we don't need to be implanted. People think, the iPhone is just something that helps them, which it actually does. And it'd be the perfect item to help us in every sense, except for the fact that it allows for complete surveillance of everything we do, of what we buy, our social media activities, what kind of music we like, what kind of novels we like, all of that can be learned in no time at all. So why go to the length of implanting us when we're already implanted, but it's just stuck in your pocket instead of under your skin?
Right. Absolutely. Well, it's what a trip. I can't believe we live in this world, but we've got a lot of wonderful things that technology has done for us, but so many disturbing questions that we have to deal with. And I also think there's a dumbing down of society, and I also think that we're becoming less and less in touch with our intuitive abilities, and we have no social skills anymore. But that's a whole nother show.
Well, in a way it is, but on the other hand, when you're talking about surveillance of abductees, it's just that angle of people being watched because they're put in an unfortunate position, that someone decides, we're going to watch this person or these people. I think that's an important thing to know. But yeah, you're right. We're getting into a situation in society where a lot of people just accept that this is how the future is going to be, and well, why should it be like that? Why can't they just go after the bad guys? Why does it have to be like something that potentially blankets everybody? Like Alexa, I would not have that thing in my house for $1 million.
No, I wouldn't either.
No. The technology, there's nothing wrong with the technology. I don't have any issues with that. What I have an issue with is the potential abuse of it by outside sources that want to basically listen to your conversations on your couch in your living room, which is feasible now, which is doable.
Oh, absolutely. And we can't even get, the people that, they can't even get a hold of Facebook and make sure that that's a safe platform. So, of course, anything can be manipulated. And I think we need to, just be.
Well, you see, the thing is that the way that works is how, one of the things I point out in the book is how easy it is to follow the abductees today. A couple of the people I interviewed for the book and who had been visited by agencies, the reason why they were visited was purely and simply because they started talking about their experiences on Facebook and other social media. Now, one of the people who I interviewed, she was visited by like security personnel after talking about having these graphic dreams. She was an abductee, I should stress that first. And she started to get these graphic dreams of like a nuclear war and the destruction of various cities in the US. And in the dream, or nightmare, whichever way you want to look at it, that the US in her dreams had been sort of rendered incapable of fighting back because they were subjected to what's called an electromagnetic pulse attack. Now, for people who don't know what an EMP attack is, it's not like a nuclear attack. It's an electromagnetic pulse weapon, essentially blankets an area and wipes all like electricity, technology, etc. So in other words, prior to a nuclear attack, you could have a situation where someone like the Russians could hit us with EMP weapons. You would not be able to start your car engine, your phone wouldn't work, your laptop wouldn't work, your lights would go out, your microwave, everything would stop working. And then because we have no way to fight back, then you're incapable of fighting back. So, you end up destroyed. And so this was the scenario that she and a number of abductees had in these graphic nightmares of a preempted strike on the US, but with an EMP attack. And she put all this on her Facebook page, and then she got a visit, which makes absolutely perfect sense. That if somebody is speaking on Facebook and saying that I've been getting these graphic dreams of EMP attacks on the US, and it's going on, and there's other people having these same experiences, it's like inevitable that someone's going to take note of that, you know what I mean? And because people are going to take notice, somebody who may be following that and worrying about it in government may well go and interview them, as they did, and say, hey, would you mind just sharing a bit more information? And that's what she had. There was no threat. There was no sinister situation. It was more along the lines of, we're following this EMP theory that, how the Russians might be able to sort of preempt an attack. And would you mind just expanding a bit on what you posted on your Facebook page? And she was like, well, I didn't know you were looking at it. And they were like, well, yes.
In a way, that's a good thing. In a way that comforts me.
It is. Yeah, and she was she wasn't threatened, no slammed against the wall. It was just, would you just be willing to talk to us and just, we can't tell you not to talk about it. We prefer you didn't, but could you just elaborate on what you put on there? Because other people have told us the same thing about this EMP issue. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but way back in 1984, Whitley Strieber, one of the most famous abductees, he actually wrote a book called War Day, which deals with, and a lot of it was sort of almost written in like a prophetic fashion. He wrote a novel.
Oh, no, I've got to cut you off right there. I can hear that music, so we will talk about that when we get back. I'm Erica Lukes here with Nick Redfern. Keep asking questions in chat. We will take a break and be right back.
Listen very carefully.
This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
This is UFO Classified, live every Friday night, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The truth is out there, just waiting to be discovered.
And now, if you will, accompany me on a journey to the future.
For more information on the host of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes, upcoming guests, as well as links to the past shows,
visit her website at UFOclassified.com.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified. UFO Classified.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a shack just south of Area 51. Wait, that doesn't exist. This is the KCOR Digital Radio Network. Now for the news.
This landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico. The rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brazell was the man who discovered the saucer.
What I thought was a star began coming in my direction at a very rapid rate of speed.
The unidentified object, which some sources thought might be a blimp, moved slowly down the Pacific coast from Santa Monica and disappeared south of Long Beach.
I saw a UFO, and it went down the river, turned right at the United Nations, turned left, and then down the river.
UFO Classified. UFO Classified. No more plausible deniability. Fact, fiction, or the truth. You decide. And now, the new voice of the high desert, the hostess of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes.
Welcome back to the second half of the best show out there. I'm just going to throw that out there. I have to say that I do a lot of research and devote money, time, effort into making sure that I get guests who will give good information to you and that I also know my subject. This is very important to me. And thank you for all of you who get in there and support the show. The show is supported by all of you listeners. And I want to just give a big thanks again to Northern UFOs for helping me so much. You guys mean the world to me and you're the reason that I'm here. Tonight, I am with a friend and colleague, Nick Redfern. Nick wrote a book called Final Events, and I've spoken with him at great length for a few years about that book and his research, and we've been doing some interesting new research on all of this, which we'll have to talk about at some point. But Nick Redfern has a great blog, and you can go and read all about his new articles, which he has a new article that he published November 13th, Trio of Mysterious Deaths in Ufology, then Men in Black Good Guys, When UFO Paranoia is Justified. Well, I don't know, Nick, did you have anybody in mind when you wrote that?
Well, not really, no. But yeah, I mean, there have been, some mysterious deaths in ufology. I mean, for example, in the new book, Top Secret Alien Abduction Files, I talk about two guys, Wilbur Wilkinson and Carl Hunrath. And they were people in the 50s who claimed they'd had contact with aliens. And the story went that in one particular day in November 1953, they were due to fly out of a small airstrip in California where supposedly they were due to meet this particular alien race or representatives of this alien race. And they took to the skies and they were quite literally never seen again. And Hunrath and Wilkinson were sort of minor cogs in the early years of 1950s ufology. They were friends with George Adamski and George Hunt Williamson, some of the early contactees, and they were never seen again. The plane was never seen again, despite extensive searches, by emergency personnel and things like that. And, whether they were dead, killed, whether they vanished, whether they were abducted. That's why I mentioned the story in the book. But it's a fascinating tale, and I was able to get some of the FBI's files on Hunrath and Wilkinson, talking about all their research and their connections with Adamski. So, there have been some weird and mysterious deaths in ufology. There's no doubt about that whatsoever, and it makes you wonder, how sort of deep this angle actually goes.
Yeah, no, I mean, I absolutely think it's pretty deep, and I think there are some leads that I've been exploring that will be very interesting in the coming days. So I look forward to that. But when we first went to break, or when we were going to break, you were talking about a book that Whitley Strieber wrote called War Day.
I've forgotten about that.
So, well, it's a good thing that I keep track of you.
But yeah, I mean, back in '84, Whitley Strieber wrote this novel called War Day, and it's a really good novel, but it's a very disturbing novel as well, about a nuclear attack or nuclear exchange between the Russians and the US, but where both sides realize after launching a small amount of missiles, they realize that if they keep on, everybody's going to be dead. So both sides, in a kind of a panicky situation, pull back at the last minute. But by then, the damage has been done. And of the, sort of 300 million people in the US, I think something like 100 million die, whether from the bombs or starvation or radiation, or disease. and the country, is in just collapse, as is Russia as well. But what's intriguing is that, that Strieber is an abductee. And he, in his story, in his novel, he talks about how the Russians were able to sort of launch a preemptive strike by using electromagnetic pulse technology, EMP technology, to render all our electronic systems completely useless. And that's not like a theoretical scenario. EMP technology, directed EMP technology will just, wipe out anything from microwaves to TVs to, your cell phone, everything is wiped out. And so it's intriguing that, a number of abductees in the last few years, like the woman I mentioned who put her story on Facebook, Strieber, as an abductee, was talking about that, way back in the 1980s. And, his novel is really, sort of put the hairs on your arms stand up. I mean, it really shows what a real nuclear war would be like, not like you see in these old propaganda things about hiding under the school desk for 10 minutes, and then you can come out and everything will be fine. It won't, but it was things like that that prompted these agencies to, to chat and speak with the abductees, because they were as concerned, as the abductees were, and they were not the bad guys at all. They were concerned as to, where the future was taking us with this whole abduction phenomenon.
Well, it is very curious, and I want to say that you in one of the chapters, or in several chapters, you're talking also about the way abductees were monitored and the black helicopters, and that has been a common theme we hear. So, if you can give us a little information or some stories about what you've learned about black helicopters.
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, the black helicopter phenomenon is one of the more intriguing aspects of ufology. Now, numerous UFO researchers and investigators have been sort of subjected to surveillance by black helicopters, for want of a better term. When we talk about black helicopters, it's sort of a generic term for helicopters that really do not have any markings on them at all, no numbers, identifying figures or nothing. But sometimes, they're not always black, but they're not identifiable either. Other people have reported, bizarrely, seeing helicopters that are completely silent, some sort of highly advanced, sort of almost like a stealth technology. But what's intriguing is a lot of people who've had the abduction experience have been monitored and watched via the black helicopter phenomenon. Now, I talk about a number of intriguing cases in the book, not just from the United States, but from the UK and up into Canada, suggesting strongly that somebody is using these black helicopters to almost intimidate, in some cases, the abductees, coming so close to the person's home, where the helicopter's maybe like 200 feet in the sky and maybe 300 feet away, and it's got that whoop, 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 whoop beating kind of sound, just bouncing through your chest, because the helicopters are so close. And this has often been when people have shared their stories with UFO researchers, so it's kind of almost like a warning, intimidating kind of situation. But in the book, I talk about a lot of experiences where abductees, like, for example, Betty Andreasson, whose story was written by, and her story was told in a number of books over the years, and it's a fascinating story, but it encompasses the whole, like a clear indication, if you like, that something's going on. And Betty's story was told at length by Ray Fowler, a well-respected UFO researcher who wrote several books about Betty and her family. And, you can find so many of these, almost like a quick reaction military organisation that, is sent out to investigate recent or, just literally hours ago kind of abductions, that sort of thing. And again, I think they're struggling to get the answers. I don't think the people flying these helicopters, really know too much more than we do, but, and it's a very strange situation. And ironically enough, earlier this year, I think February, March, I actually had 2 black helicopters right over my apartment, and I've actually got the pictures. They're on Facebook, and the situation was really weird because this was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I think it was like February, March. So, the weather was sort of getting dark, but it wasn't super dark. And these 2 helicopters quite literally did not have a single marking on them at all. There was nothing. And that's actually it's actually illegal to fly a helicopter without any identification markings on it. But there was not one. There was nothing. And the whole helicopter was just completely black, and there was 2 of them. And so, I kind of found that weird. It doesn't bother me, it doesn't disturb me. I'm not the sort of person who sort of, hides in the corner of the room shaking or whatever. That's not my character. What I did was to go outside and get my phone and take a bunch of pictures, and post them to Facebook, which I think is the right thing to do. But you can understand why some people might sort of get into that state of fear and anxiety and panic attack. For me, though, I guess the most eye-opening thing was, wow, I'd heard these stories about completely black helicopters without markings or anything. I'm like, well, could it have been late at night and they just didn't show up much? But, I was able to see these helicopters up close and personal, so to speak, and there was not a single marking anywhere on them. They were it was like somebody taking a helicopter and got like 35 cans of black aerosol spray and just sprayed the entire helicopter. That's the best way I can describe it.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, and it's interesting because when I first had some sightings back in 2013, it was from that moment on that I really paid attention to my surroundings. And one day after a particularly profound sighting, I had a black unmarked helicopter fly right over my car, and it was very disconcerting. But then I started to notice that, at any given time, there are at least 5 quote-unquote black helicopters that are circling the valley, and they're flying low. And so are they keeping us safe? If they're testing things, why aren't they doing that over the tens of thousands of acres at the Utah Test and Training, facility, all of that. So there's so many questions. And I mean, I fully support our military, and I understand how many brave people keep us safe. But I also, it's disconcerting when you are a concerned citizen and you're looking up and you're seeing some of these things, and there are no answers.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you bring up the whole issue of, the military, because I'm not entirely sure that, the black helicopter phenomenon is actually controlled by, what we would consider, quote, the military. I think a lot of these programs that involve things like black helicopters are actually so deeply buried that even the vast majority of people within the government, within the military, within the intelligence community, I think they don't even know anything about who fly these helicopters. I don't think most people are hiding it. They just don't know. But you expect, because they're from the government, that people would know. And I think for that reason alone, I think the black helicopter phenomenon pretty much sort of operates outside of the regular confines, if you like, of governments. And I mean, a perfect example, although this is fiction, I mean, just like about a month ago, which I'm sure you'll remember, we watched a movie together, Endangered Species, all about the cattle mutilation phenomenon.
Yes.
But in the movie, the black helicopters which are used are sort of employed by a government group, but which operates outside of the government. And I think that's why it's been so difficult to figure out who's monitoring the abductees, who's flying the black helicopters, because much of it operates outside of the regular governments. And I mean, another example, like a really kind of creepy and weird example, is that one of the people I talk about in the top secret alien abduction files is a guy named Ed Conroy. Now, mentioned Whitley Strieber earlier, and his book Communion, which sort of really changed the face of ufology and in terms of the abduction phenomenon. Strieber's book was published in 1987, Communion. And Ed Conroy is a journalist and living in San Antonio, and he wrote a book called Report on Communion. And it was basically Ed Conroy's totally impartial investigation of Strieber's claims. And it's a really good book, Report on Communion. Now, Ed Conroy, the more he began to look into Strieber's stories, I point out in the book, Conroy found himself being watched as well. Again, sort of black helicopters over his home, and he saw almost like the equivalent of what today we call like a shadow person in his house. So, and even Strieber has talked about how his security alarm was disabled in his home, and he would get these weird phone calls in the middle of the night, almost like intimidating him. So, you know, there's a lot of weird stuff going on, but I think a lot of it is outside of the confines of regular governments, you know, the Senate, Congress. Even most of the people in the intelligence community and the military probably really don't know what's going on because, you know, they're out of the loop, really.
Well, and that's exactly right. And I'm sitting here with a document on my hands that I've been looking at for quite some time, and it's called UFO Helicopter Overflights of the United States Air Force Bases in 1975, and that was obtained, by the Citizens Against UFO Secrecy. And in this, I mean, there are reports of these helicopters that demonstrate, quote unquote, a clear intent in the weapons storage area. They are smart and most capable aviators. And as a result of these helicopters flying over these weapons storage areas, local security had been increased, and they anticipated further incidents, according to the request and continued presence of Air Guard helicopters. So, I mean, they're obviously, you know, the military was concerned about this type of thing.
Oh yeah, I mean those 1975 files you're talking about. I've got quite a lot of those, and you know they run into hundreds and hundreds of pages of these unmarked and unidentified and black helicopters in these what was called like the northern tier areas of the United States. But on top of that, this was the same time frame when there were a bunch of black helicopters were being seen in New Mexico, where there'd been in 75 as well a lot of cattle mutilations, and there was also in 74 a big wave of black helicopters in the UK at the same time, which I also talk about in the book as well. So, you know, clearly somebody is monitoring something. But, you know, we talked about sort of Facebook and social media today, but, I mean, if you go back sort of 20 years, one of the cases I talk about in the book is of a mutual good friend of ours, Greg Bishop. Now, I've known Greg for probably... I think I actually met him 20 years ago this year when I was speaking at the UFO Congress in Nevada at the time. But I'd been subscribing to his magazine prior to that, probably going back to about 93, 94, something like that. He put out a magazine called The Excluded Middle, which is a really good magazine. And Greg told me how on a number of occasions, if not all occasions, when he was in correspondence with Dr. Carla Turner, who was an abductee who wrote a book called Into the Fringe. She died at a young age from cancer. But Greg and Carla Turner became good friends, and they spent a lot of time sort of chatting with each other and writing letters to each other. And bear in mind, this was sort of 91, 92, 93, 94, long before the internet of today was around. So, they wrote letters on typewriters and sent them off to each other, and go down to the post office and get one of those mysterious things called a stamp, and mail them off. But Greg told me how on every occasion that he and Carla sent letters to each other, the responding letters would arrive, but the envelopes would be opened, and they'd have been, they were resealed with Scotch tape, and it was done in such a way that it was clear that somebody was essentially kind of, telling them something, hey, we're opening your mail and we're resealing it, and we are. So in other words, it was kind of like intimidation. No attempt was made ever to make it look as if the envelopes had not been opened. In fact, it was almost as if whoever was doing this was going out of their way to make it clear that both Carla and Greg did know that they were being watched. So I think it was a kind of intimidation. But Greg told me that the only time he had this issue of envelopes being opened and so on was in relation to two issues, one being alien abductions and the other one being cattle mutilations. He was also in touch with a certain cattle mutilation researcher at that time. So, in other words, it was a very odd situation and clearly driven by hoping that Greg and Carla would become intimidated and walk away, but neither of them did. Greg continues. Sadly, Carla died, but Greg did kind of feel for a while, that he was being watched, and things like that kept happening. The mail surveillance of abductees and things like this, and weird phone calls in the night, and a lot of weird stuff that for a while did kind of make him a little bit paranoid, but, a justified paranoia as well.
Well, and so before we go to break, because you got about 30 seconds, do you know the name of the person he was in touch with regard to the cattle mutilations?
Yes, and during the break I can find it out.
Okay. Perfect. And on that note, I'm Erica Lukes here, Nick Redfern, and I will post links to get his amazing book and to his blog. I just think the world of him. We are going to take a quick break. We will be right back.
Stand by. This is UFO Classified with Erica Lukes. Erica Lukes. The phone lines are open now at 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio. More UFO Classified. UFO Classified with Erica Lukes on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. After this.
1 million miles till midnight. A story of timelines, artificial worlds, simulated races, and the galactic imprint, and the destiny of a blue world called Earth. 1 million miles till midnight, written by Solaris Blue Raven, is a journey through the mind's eye which allows the reader to surf a wave of technological and multidimensional intellect, revealing a bridge between conscious design and the truth. A multidimensional bleed-through awakens the world of artificial intelligence to set sail into the frontiers of a vast multiverse, morphing planets and terraforming ascended worlds beyond the linear programs of a fated race. 1 million miles till midnight will awaken, inspire, prepare, and enlighten one to the many multidimensional states of consciousness and worlds we reside in. With every cell and atom, we are this truth and multiverse. 1 million miles till midnight. Written by Solaris Blue Raven. Available now at Amazon.com. Don't wait. Get your copy today.
It's great. I think it's great. It's great.
The all-new KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Great. Make a note of it. It's great.
If ever a breed was affectionate to a fault, it's the Golden Retriever. They're people dogs, pure and simple. And the Golden Retriever Rescue of Southern Nevada needs your help. If you would like to volunteer, foster, adopt, or donate, go to the Golden Retriever Rescue of Southern Nevada's website at grrsn.org. That's grrsn.org. Or call 598-GOLD. That's 598-GOLD.
Gee, it's so quiet. Too quiet. Terribly quiet. Awfully quiet.
Do you have an hour to kill? Well, crank up those EVPs, spirit boxes, and walk the haunted halls of the unknown with UK's very own paranormal investigator, David Cook.
You guys ready for this?
The Ghostly Hour, live Sunday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern.
And now you're live.
Come hear first-hand accounts of some of the most famous ghost sightings, photos, and videos from around the world. Skeptics, believers, and spirits, both good and bad. Welcome to the Ghostly Hour, hosted by David Cook. Live every Sunday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. Exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
You're listening to
UFO Classified with Erica Lukes, where the truth isn't hidden beneath the black lines of a Sharpie.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
To be on with Erica, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio.
Radio contact.
Share your thoughts on the show on Twitter by using hashtag KCOR. Or head over to the live chats at KCORradio.com.
The audience goes nuts.
And now, your host of UFO Classified.
Are you ready?
Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
Welcome back to the final segment of UFO Classified. It is always with great pains that I have to come back for our final segment because I could keep talking forever. I love these conversations, and I'm happy to know that all of you are listening. Make sure that you share information about this show and keep everything going so we're getting good information out there. As I stressed at the beginning of the show, we have a real critical need to get information out that is good and not manipulated by political agendas or delusional people or yada, yada, yada. But there is good information out here. And my guest this evening is one of those people who has worked for many, many years to get good information out. I'm here with Nick Redfern, who just released a book, Top Secret Alien Abduction Files, What the Government Doesn't Want You to Know. We've been talking about some of these cases, and I want to just start with, we were talking about some of the black helicopter cases, and in October of 1975, one unidentified helicopter was sighted 300 to 500 meters from the weapons storage area at Loring Air Force Base in Maine. The helicopter was an altitude of 150 feet and penetrated the Air Force Base. And an attempt to contact and identify the intruding helicopter was made by the National Guard and was unsuccessful. And so as I look at some of these cases that we were talking about, Nick, before we went to break, I mean, there was a very real concern by our military to protect the Air Force bases, and this was a problem. The black helicopters. It's all very curious.
Yeah, and I think if you just look at the logistics of a helicopter, it can sort of get in out very, very quickly. It doesn't need a runway to land, like an aircraft does. So I think the whole angle of sort of like quick reaction, if you like. The helicopter is sort of the perfect vehicle to go here, to go there, to land quickly, not have to worry about trying to find the nearest airport, land in a field and so on. So I think a lot of it, it comes down to that in terms of why these helicopters are being used, in terms of surveying people. And I think a lot of it comes down to they're trying to figure out who's doing the abductions and why, and they're trying to catch them, in the process of actually doing it. But whatever the extraterrestrial or alien, however you want to term it, phenomenon is, it's so bizarre and strange that it's almost as if we just don't have the ability to, prevent this from going on, and we don't really understand what is going on in the first place. What is the point of these abductions? And, is it to learn more about us? Is it about taking, blood, DNA and so on to try and figure out, are we compatible, and might they want to make human-alien hybrids, or, are they a sort of a waning race that, needs to sort of beef up its stock, so to speak, or the more disturbing scenario, are they kind of like trying to create a Manchurian candidate kind of sleepers, who'll be switched on at some point for a particular purpose or whatever?
Well, I might say I'd be more concerned about our, whatever is going on here on planet Earth than maybe an extraterrestrial civilization or demonic, whatever we might, have going on, because you hear about so much that we've done with regard to testing or manipulation, and I'm not even going to go there, but it's very difficult for me not to go there. But I think that our biggest threat is from our own species, and that's most unfortunate. But with regard to the black helicopters, could this be mimicry? Because we've heard a lot from people, Dr. Jacques Vallée, several others, who talk about the fact that whatever this intelligence is, it can mimic things that are in our environment. So this would just be, you look up, you see something, this is what it resembles, and we will look the other way. I mean, is that what's going on?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, that's a good point, because although, for the vast majority of these accounts and witness reports of black helicopters, they do sound like regular helicopters, except, there's no markings. But in saying that, there are some cases which go sort of like a much weirder path. And by that, I mean, there are people who claim to have seen these black helicopters flying around where UFO encounters had occurred, and the black helicopter just quite literally sort of vanishes into nothing. Or it kind of shrinks down into like a ball of light, which then shoots away. Other people have said it looks like a holographic image that also sort of flits away into nothing. Now, this actually ties in, which you mentioned my Final Events book earlier, which looks at this group within the government that believes the UFO phenomenon is demonic. And they actually came to believe that these black helicopters were sort of almost like a holographic imagery, which would sort of mask and camouflage the real appearance of the craft, and make them look like helicopters. So you would see something in the sky, you would see it as a helicopter, rather than see it as what it really is, some sort of bizarre, weird, multi-dimensional craft or whatever. And of course, that really takes things down a very controversial and deep scenario that goes far beyond just, the angle of military black helicopters, but black helicopters or images of black helicopters created by the UFO phenomenon itself.
Oh, wow. Yeah, there's so much here, and I love that you are talking about Final Events, because I say this on most of my shows. That is a pivotal book, and I will keep doing whatever I can to work with you to figure out what some of the threads are now in current times. And so let's get back to the cattle mutilations and how, you mentioned that Greg Bishop and Carla Turner the cattle mutilations and abductions were the two hotspots where they felt that they were really being monitored. So what about the cattle mutilations?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, regardless of what lies at the heart of the whole cattle mutilation phenomenon, there's no doubt that it's a very, disturbing phenomenon. I mean, there's no other way to put it. Animals, particularly in the 1970s and particularly around sort of northern New Mexico, Colorado, places like that, you find a lot of stories from the 1970s particularly where ranchers, they'd wake up in the morning and find, their cattle dead and with organs removed and with significant amounts of blood removed and strange tripod landing marks on the ground. Now, for people who might think that is actually way too over the top, what I would do is refer them to the FBI's official website, which is called the Vault. And so if you go to vault.gov and then you click on there's a bunch of links on the website where you can find like PDF, now previously classified FBI files, which are now declassified, on everything from like Frank Sinatra, Marilyn Monroe, and so on, Jimi Hendrix, thousands of files. But one of the files in the unexplained phenomenon file is the FBI's cattle mutilation file, which the FBI put into the public domain. And he actually talks about sightings of black helicopters in New Mexico and elevated radiation readings in the vicinity of the cattle mutilations and odd tripod marks on the ground, and how they got the guys from Los Alamos involved to investigate. All those files, you can now declassify them and download them from the FBI's website, the Vault. So I'd recommend everybody to read those. But when you look at these files, it's clear that something has a technology that is way beyond ours, that seems to operate in extreme stealth. I mean, how many people could kind of go out into a field at night with a helicopter and kill, a cow and remove all its organs and not have the ranchers know about it? None of the other animals on the farm, screaming out and, causing a fuss, etc. So something's going on that seems to operate in an extremely stealthy way. And if you read those FBI files, I mean, they tell a really weird story. And we mentioned, earlier that movie we watched together. It demonstrates that there's a real phenomenon. What it is, I don't know. But, I mean, whatever it is, though, Carla and Greg, were both clearly watched for various reasons in direct relation to all that.
And that is interesting. And I wanted to say that I sent a little message to Greg to give him, the heads up that we were talking about him. And he said to tell you hello. And so it'll be fun to have both of you on the show to talk about some of these things. And it's crazy. And I had mentioned to you about Greg came to town a couple of weeks ago, and we spent some time together, which was really fun. We had high tea at the Grand America, and then we went to this really cool used bookstore, Ken Sanders. And Ken Sanders has had some reality shows based on him. He's the one who had a lot of workings with the Salamander Letter. So if you're a Mormon buff, you'll know about that. But I found Operation Animal Mutilation, which was a report of the District Attorney, 1st Judicial District, State of New Mexico, by Ken Rommel back in 1980. And I found that, and Greg was just like, oh, my Lord. He was a little bit, he was jealous. He got another good thing about cattle mutilations. I know you're a little bit jealous about that, so I will be, making copies. What can I say?
But,
I might have. It's interesting.
Well, when I come up, we'll have to copy that, because when you told me you got that, and you also found first edition copies of the first two books ever written on the Men in Black, I was like, what? But no, you did really well on getting those. I mean, that Operation Animal Mutilation report is extremely rare, because it was actually never released through the Freedom of Information Act. There were certain issues that allowed it to be withheld from FOIA, but it was legally, if you had the right clearance and etc., and within the court service and so on, you could access it. So yeah, you did really well getting a copy of that. So, yeah.
Well, these little things, and that's the great thing about going into used bookstores and or having, connections,
Well, slightly off topic. That's how sometimes, the answers to some of these phenomena, that's how they do get out, because, the story comes out or the information comes out in an alternative way, which perhaps those behind the scenes aren't anticipating. You got a hold of that because somebody clearly in an official position probably had that document, the Operation Animal Mutilation one, and for whatever purpose, they decided to sell it, to their local used bookstore. No one would ever think that would happen, you know what I mean? But things like that actually do happen. So I think that might one day, be the way in which the whole UFO thing comes tumbling out. Not because of straightforward legislation to try and get the material or the government releasing it, but because something gets released in an unforeseen situation or surfaces in an unforeseen situation, and before you know it, the whole thing starts to tumble out,
Well, I mean, and that was like, and then you think about this, it was such a strange, trippy, day at the used bookstore. And I think both Greg and myself were just looking through these books, and Greg found, some things that were incredible. And then I found this, and it was just like, whoa. I mean, is this like a bizarre synchronicity? Like, is there a deeper meaning to this? I don't know. We could get all, synchronistic on all of this, but that was quite the find, and it was very timely. And I will say that I'm excited about this. So I would love to Xerox this for you when you come up, and then we'll, continue our conversations about some of your research and final events and all of that good stuff.
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of it kind of does tie in. I mean, the guys that I mentioned in Final Events, the group that was looking into this demonic angle, they were investigating cattle mutilations but couldn't figure out who was doing it. And then the Air Force in 1975, when there was this wave of UFO encounters around military bases where there were also black helicopters were seen, then you've got the cattle mutilations and black helicopters. But the thing that puts all these stories together is that the government agencies, none of them seem to have a full understanding of who was flying these helicopters, which sounds really weird. You would expect the government to know, but they actually didn't know. That's sort of the really strange aspect of all this. So, when you look at it like that, you have to sort of really kind of open your eyes and wonder, well, if the elected government doesn't really know who's doing this, or they don't know who within government is investigating the abductees, well, who on earth is doing it? If the government can't get the answers to who's, going knocking on the doors of abductees and, wanting to know about this or that, and the elected government doesn't know, that shows how deeply buried some of these groups, these UFO groups actually are, to the point where even the government doesn't know they exist. Which sounds strange, but things like that do happen, that sometimes even the government doesn't know what it knows.
No, it does. I mean, it's so compartmentalized. And I mean, you've got so many, and now we've got so many contractors that can come in and you can avoid FOIAs completely because all of this work is being passed off to some of these contractors for the government, and that makes it a little bit more exciting. But you look at that with regard to the $22 million allocation from the Pentagon to study all of this, and then the acquisition of the MUFON database and things like that. And so, I mean, it is all very, very curious for sure. But I want to just... Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
The one thing I would say is that, looking at this whole issue of government agencies watching, the whole issue of abductees and, what they learned and so on, I honestly did not come across a single case of all the people I interviewed where the abductees were threatened, frightened, intimidated. It really was, hey, you know, we saw this story you put on Facebook, we saw this, we saw that. Would you mind just sharing the information because we do feel it's important? It really was as if they were just, you know, just looking for answers and hoping that the people would be willing to help them, you know, and that kind of, that's sort of like a refreshing thing that sort of suggested to me that the government doesn't know, but they're not putting the, you know, sort of the turning the screw, so to speak, on the abductees. They're just basically saying, we're in the same boat as you, we're investigating it, you're experiencing it, can we come together and kind of share the data because we're worried, you know, that as to what this phenomenon is and why it's going on.
And that's comforting. I mean, and I hope that would be the case. I mean, I'm sure it's just like anything, there are good and bad elements of all of this. And like you discovered with your research to final events, there is a small faction who wants to use occult practices and human sacrifice and things like that to manipulate these powers or intelligence. And then there are people that are trying to do good things inside the government and trying to help people that are having experiences. So,
well, yeah, and I think what this kind of tells us more than anything else is that when people say the government this and the government that, that's actually not how it works. What the real situation is, there are like probably 5 or 10 very classified, deeply buried groups within government that have their own views. You know, one group believes the phenomenon is demonic, another one thinks it's extraterrestrial, and so on. Others are looking at it to try and weaponize the technology, and the list goes on and on. So I think what we have are maybe even, you know, at least a handful of reports of people, or from people who've been visited by government agencies, but government agency A may not know what B is doing, B may not know what C is doing, and none of them may even know that D exists. You know, that could be the reality of the situation, that, you know, agencies are very good at hiding information, not just from us, but from each other. And I think a lot of people don't appreciate that as to how there could be, you know, an alien abduction research group within the government, but 99.9% of the government know nothing about it, you know, because they're not cleared. So I think, you know, it's not so much we just need to investigate the research that's being done into abductions by the government, but we need to figure out how it's being done without, you know, the elected officials, you know, the Senate, Congress, how they are actually out the loop. You know, that's one of the more fascinating aspects of it all.
Well, it is. And I mean, I think most people, as we know, don't care about this topic because they don't understand the gravity. I mean, unless you've had an experience or unless you've been researching things like you have, you don't understand the grave and severe implications that this topic, you know, has. And so I don't know. I think that this is one of those times and one of those. To me, it's very pivotal, and we need to get good information out, and we need to understand that elected officials don't have knowledge, and that a majority of the people in intelligence don't care about this because they're trying to do their job and help us from enemy threats and different things. And so I don't know, where do you even begin?
Well, I think all we can really do is just sort of follow all the information, the flow of information that we've got, and excuse me, and just see where it all leads. Because I mean, you know, that's what I try and do. If somebody tells me a story, and you know, like an abductee was interviewed by, say, let's say Mr. Jones, you know, and she knew what agency from Mr. Jones was from, then you try and track the story down further. And I think that's the only way we can do it. We need to apply sort of investigative journalistic approaches to studying something that is really, for the most part, unless it's poking fun at it, you know, which the media doesn't really cover that much. You know, yeah, there was quite a bit of coverage at the end of last year when, you know, we had the whole issue of the secret UFO program and so on. But for the most part, the media doesn't cover it. That's what I think we need to do as researchers, is to apply journalistic techniques and approaches to uncover the truth of this phenomenon and why it concerns people and why the government is and has, watched and monitored alien abductees. What is so concerning to the governments that they feel the need to, to keep watch and so on.
Well, and I absolutely agree. And it's been an interesting thing for myself who I've had a lifetime full of experiences, as you know, because you get to hear about them quite frequently. But I mean, it's all of these things make you think, and you wonder or hope that maybe somebody's watching or paying attention and trying to figure things out for the greater good of humanity, but that remains to be seen. So, I mean, thank you for all of your work, and thank you for your friendship and kind of helping me through some of the things that I'm going through. I really appreciate that. And I want to tell people that about, your blog, which is nickredfernfordian.blogspot.com, and about your new book, Top Secret Alien Abduction Files, What the Government Doesn't Want You to Know, which is available on Amazon. And so where are you going to be speaking next?
Well, I've actually got one on the second weekend in December in Austin, Texas. I'll be speaking at what's called the Anomaly Archives, and I'll be speaking actually on this book, Top Secret Alien Abduction Files. So for anybody who happens to be in the Austin, Texas area that weekend, I'll be speaking. That'll be the last one I'll have for this year, but then a couple of weeks after that, I'll be listing all my lectures and so on for 2019.
I will keep everybody posted. I'm Erica Lukes. Thanks, Nick Redfern. Stick around for Great Night on KCOR. William Miranda is up next on the Paradigm Matrix.
Listen very carefully.
This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
This is UFO Classified, live every Friday night, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The truth is out there, just waiting to be discovered.
And now, if you will, accompany me on a journey to the future.
For more information on the host of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes, upcoming guests, as well as links to the past shows,
visit her website at UFOclassified.com.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified. UFO Classified.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a shack just south